The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened at 800 hours, standard galactic time, aboard the Nexus station orbiting the neutral world of Covenant Prime. 7 species had gathered, their representatives filling the circular chamber with a cacophony of translated voices, chemical signals, and electromagnetic pulses. The translators worked overtime, converting the biological diversity of communication into something each species could understand. Ambassador Marcus Reeves sat in the human delegation section, his jaw tight, gray temples catching the artificial light. Beside him, Commander Lucia Wren reviewed tactical data on a handheld display, while junior diplomat David Park prepared documentation that everyone present already knew would be ignored. Reeves had served in the United Earth Space Force for 20 years before transitioning to diplomatic service. He understood violence, had seen what it did to people, and had hoped the stars would offer something better than what humanity had always done to itself. He was about to be disappointed. The Dorvani representative, a reptilian creature named Sessic whose scales shifted through colors denoting bureaucratic authority, called the session to order. The matter at hand was simple in its horror. The Miraan species faced extermination. Their homeworld had fallen to the Zelthari collective 3 months prior. Their colonies had been systematically destroyed, and approximately 3 million refugees now fled through the Vex Corridor in ships never meant for extended spaceflight. The Miraan had committed no crime. They possessed no strategic resources the Zelthari needed. They had simply existed in space the Zelthari collective wanted, and the collective's ideology deemed them genetically inferior. The Zelthari had announced their intentions through official channels, citing some obscure principle of territorial purification that made Reeves want to put his fist through something solid. The distress calls had been broadcasting for weeks, automated signals crying out to anyone who would listen, begging for sanctuary, for fuel, for food, for hope. The signals had reached every major species in the galactic community, every single one. The Viren spoke first. Their representative, a mantis-like creature named TCH-Kick, whose compound eyes reflected the chamber's light in fragmented patterns, delivered their position with the emotional weight of a quarterly earnings report. The Zelthari collective purchased 40% of Viren exports. The trade agreements had been in place for 3 generations. Breaking them would cost the Viren economy 17% of its gross product. The numbers were regrettable, of course, but mathematics did not care about sentiment. The Viren could not help. Reeves felt his hands curl into fists beneath the table. The Kelthros delegation went next. They existed partially in water-filled environment suits, their tentacles drifting in artificial currents as they communicated through color changes in their translucent skin. Their philosophy, they explained, prevented interference in the self-determined paths of other species. To intervene would be to impose Kelthros' values on the situation, to assume they knew better than the natural course of events. The Miraan situation was tragic, certainly, a deep source of philosophical discomfort, but the Kelthros had spent 10,000 years learning that interference only bred more suffering in the long term. They could not help. Commander Wren's fingers tightened on her datapad. Reeves heard the slight crack of pressure on the casing. The Dorvani cited treaty law. Sessic's scales rippled through the colors of legal precedent as he explained that according to Treaty 47, Section 12, Subsection 9, Paragraph 14, the galactic community had no legal obligation to provide military protection to non-signatory species. The Miraan had never joined the community, had in fact declined membership 40 years ago, and therefore existed outside the legal framework that might obligate assistance. Furthermore, the Zelthari collective, while aggressive, had not violated any treaties to which the Dorvani were signatories. The law was clear. They could not help. David Park looked at his notes, then at Reeves, his young face struggling with the realization that this was what galactic civilization actually meant. The Thule crystalline form chimed its response, vibrations translated into words. They were old, far older than any other species present. They had observed 10,000 cycles of galactic politics, watched empires rise and collapse, seen wars that had consumed entire spiral arms. They knew, with the certainty of deep time, that intervention only bred more conflict. Today's rescue became tomorrow's territorial dispute, became next century's war. The pattern was invariable. The Thule did not act based on emotional response to singular events. They could not help. The Gren representative, a mammalian creature covered in soft fur that rippled with anxiety, spoke quietly. Their species specialized in agriculture, in growing things, in nurturing life across dozens of worlds. But their military was designed purely for defense, small patrol craft meant to protect convoys and discourage pirates. Against the Zelthari battle fleet, the Gren would be slaughtered within hours. They had families, colonies, billions of their own people who depended on their government's wisdom. They desperately wished they could help, but they could not. The Zelthari, avian beings whose wings had been modified for zero-gravity maneuvering, explained their position with the certainty of historians. They documented galactic events, maintained archives spanning millennia, preserved the truth of what had happened so future generations could learn. But they did not participate. To act was to become part of the story rather than its observers. Their role was sacred, their neutrality absolute. They would record what happened to the Miraan with great care and deep regret, but they could not help. 6 species, 6 variations on the same answer. No. Reeves stood, and the chamber's attention shifted to him like a physical weight. He was not a tall man, but he carried himself with the bearing of someone who had commanded ships in the deep dark. His voice, when he spoke, was level and controlled. "The Miraan are dying," he said, "not in some abstract future conflict. Not in a philosophical thought experiment. Right now, today, 3 million sentient beings are suffocating in ships held together with hope and desperation. They're rationing air. They're watching their children go hungry. They're broadcasting their location into the void and praying anyone will care enough to help." He looked at each delegation in turn. "You've all explained very eloquently why you can't. The economics don't work. The philosophy isn't right. The treaties don't require it. You don't have the capability. You need to stay neutral. I understand all of that. I do. But I want each of you to think about what you're actually saying. You're saying that your comfort is more valuable than their lives, that your principles matter more than 3 million people who did nothing wrong except exist in the wrong place." Cessic's scales flashed the color of protocol violation. "Ambassador Reeves, this is not a productive line of humanity votes to provide immediate aid and protection to the Miraan refugees," Reeves continued. "We will deploy fleet assets to the Vex Corridor to conduct search and rescue operations. We will transport the Miraan to human space and provide sanctuary until such time as they can safely return to their worlds or establish new homes. And we will defend them against anyone who tries to finish what the Zelthari started." The chamber erupted. The Viren's translator screeched about economic warfare. The Thule chimed warnings about cascading conflicts. The Dorvani cited 17 different treaty violations. Reeves waited for the noise to die down. "Humanity submits this for a vote. All those in favor of the galactic community providing aid to the Miraan refugees." His hand rose. "Alone. All those opposed." 6 hands, tentacles, crystalline appendages, and wings. "The motion fails," Cessic announced, scales settling into the color of procedural completion. "The Galactic Council will issue a statement of deep concern regarding the Miraan situation and will establish an application process for refugee status to be administered through proper channels, with decisions expected within 18 to 24 months. Reeves gathered his materials. "Humanity abstains from the statement. We'll be too busy actually helping to draft strongly worded letters." He walked out, his delegation behind him, and did not look back at the species who had chosen to do nothing. The human embassy ship Concordia maintained orbit 300 kilometers from Nexus Station. It was not a warship, but it was built by people who understood that space was hostile and diplomacy sometimes failed. The quantum communication chamber was shielded, secure, and currently connecting Reeves to 4 of the most powerful humans in the solar system. President Alina Rostova appeared first, her image transmitted from Earth with only the slight delay of quantum entanglement correction. She had been a colony administrator on Luna before entering politics, and she had a reputation for decisions that prioritized people over process. Governor James Blackwood of Mars materialized next, his red-tinged environment suit marking him as someone who spent more time in the Martian dust than in conditioned habitats. Mars had 3 billion people now and growing. Blackwood had fought for every gram of water, every cubic meter of air, every life his world supported. Colonial Representative Yuki Tanaka of Europa joined from humanity's most distant major settlement, where people lived beneath kilometers of ice, and had learned that survival meant helping your neighbor because there was no one else coming. Admiral Helen Carver, Supreme Commander of the United Earth Space Force, completed the connection. She was angular and precise, a career officer who had come up through the ranks during humanity's expansion into the outer system. She had fought pirates in the belt and negotiated standoffs with colonial separatists. She knew exactly what Reeves was about to ask for. They said no, Reeves stated without preamble. All of them. 6 different excuses, same answer. We expected that, Rostova replied. What are you recommending? We go anyway. The 3rd Expeditionary Fleet can reach the Vex Corridor in 11 days if they leave immediately. We have the transport capacity to evacuate the Miraan and the military strength to deter the Zelthari while we work. Blackwood leaned forward. Deter or fight? Depends on the Zelthari, Reeves said. Intelligence suggests they've sent a battle group to hunt down the remaining refugees. If our fleet is there, it becomes a question of whether they're willing to engage human warships over what they consider vermin extermination. Admiral Carver pulled up tactical displays that appeared in the shared virtual space. The Zelthari battle doctrine favors overwhelming force against inferior opponents. They have experience fighting species with limited military capability. They have no experience fighting us. That makes this unpredictable. What are the risks? Tanaka asked quietly. War, Carver said bluntly. The Zelthari Collective controls 47 systems. They have a centralized military command and a culture that views compromise as weakness. If we humiliate them, they might decide they need to respond forcefully to maintain their reputation. And if we don't go, Reeves asked. The silence stretched. Rostova broke it. 3 million people die, and we become exactly like the species we were disgusted with 3 hours ago. Blackwood nodded slowly. Mars supports intervention. We've got dome space we can convert to Miraan-compatible environments. Not ideal, but it keeps them alive. Tanaka added, Europa will take as many as we can support. The Miraan are partially aquatic, correct? They'll adapt better than most to our habitats. Carver studied her tactical display. I can have the fleet underway in 6 hours. Rear Admiral Thomas Kirby is the best strategic commander we have. If anyone can pull this off without starting a war, it's him. She paused. But I need to be clear. We're committing 47 warships, 12 hospital ships, 30 transports, and 8 supply carriers. Nearly 20,000 personnel. If this goes wrong, the casualties won't be small. Rostova looked at each of them in turn, then at Reeves. Marcus, you're there. You've seen the council. Is there any chance they change their minds? Reeves thought about Sussex scales, about TCHK's cost-benefit analysis, about the Thul's ancient certainty that action bred suffering. No, Madam President, they're comfortable with their decision. Then I'm not comfortable with ours if we do nothing. Rostova's expression hardened into something that had probably built cities on airless moons and carved habitats from ice and stone. Admiral, deploy the fleet. Governor Blackwood, start preparing facilities. Representative Tanaka, coordinate with the other colonies. And Marcus, when you go back into that council chamber, I want you to make something very clear. Humanity is done asking permission to do the right thing. The connection terminated. Reeves sat in the quantum chamber for a moment, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. Somewhere in the Vex Corridor, 3 million Miraan were dying. And in 6 hours, humanity was going to do something potentially catastrophic to help them. He stood and went to brief his staff. There was work to do. The 3rd Expeditionary Fleet departed from high Earth orbit with the kind of efficiency that came from years of training for situations they hoped would never occur. Rear Admiral Thomas Kirby watched the deployment from the flag bridge of the carrier Ark Royal. his eyes tracking the coordinated movements of 97 ships breaking orbit in a carefully orchestrated sequence. Kirby was 53, methodical, and had a reputation for tactics that looked conventional until they suddenly weren't. He had cut his teeth fighting belt pirates who knew the terrain better than he did, and he had learned that assumptions got people killed. He never assumed his enemy was stupid, never assumed a plan would survive contact, and never assumed victory was guaranteed. Right now, he was assuming the Zelthari would fight. His chief of staff, Captain Raymond Cross, stood beside him reviewing the final disposition of forces. Cross commanded the battleship Indomitable and had the kind of aggressive optimism that made him valuable in a fight and occasionally exhausting in staff meetings. "Thoughts, Raymond?" Kirby asked. "We're going to kick the Zelthari so hard they'll need a new word for regret," Cross said with the confidence of someone who commanded 400,000 tons of warship. "We're going to rescue civilians while avoiding unnecessary casualties," Kirby corrected. "The goal is to extract the Miraan, not win a decisive battle. Sir, with respect, the Zelthari aren't going to just let us take their targets." "Which is why we're bringing 47 warships instead of 46, Kirby replied. "But remember, every shot we fire makes this bigger than a rescue mission. It becomes a diplomatic incident that could escalate into a war. We show strength, we deter, and we only fight if we have absolutely no other choice." Cross nodded, accepting the guidance even if his expression suggested he thought the Zelthari had already made their choice. The fleet transitioned to faster-than-light travel in a cascade of twisted spacetime, ships disappearing from the solar system one by one until only the automated beacons remained, transmitting humanity's intentions to anyone paying attention. In the Vex Corridor, the Miraan continued to die. Commander Priya Malik had joined the Space Force because she wanted to see things no human had ever witnessed. She had grown up in Mumbai, in hab blocks that stretched toward the sky, surrounded by billions of people, and she had dreamed of empty space and distant stars. The destroyer Valiant had given her that dream, command of a ship designed for speed and firepower, tasked with the dangerous work of forward scouting. Right now, she was witnessing something she wished no human ever had to see. The Miraan vessel was a converted cargo hauler, its hull patchworked with mismatched repairs and emergency sealant. According to the sensors, it held 4,000 life signs. According to the same sensors, life support was failing, power generation was at 30% capacity, and structural integrity was compromised in at least 11 sections. "They're not responding to hails," her communications officer reported. "But I'm picking up biological signals consistent with consciousness. They're alive, just not answering." "They're terrified," Malik said. "Unknown warship appears while they're helpless. They probably think we're Zelthari." She thought for a moment. "Open a channel, all frequencies, include visual." The channel activated. Malik stood where the cameras could see her clearly, human and non-threatening, wearing a pressure suit marked with the United Earth insignia. "Miraan vessel, this is Commander Priya Malik of the United Earth Space Force destroyer Valiant. We have received your distress calls. We are here to help. We have medical supplies, food, fuel, and transport capacity. Please respond if you're able to receive this transmission." Silence stretched for 30 seconds, then a minute. Malik waited patient while her crew prepared rescue equipment. The response came as a weak audio signal, the translator struggling with an unfamiliar language structure. "You are not Zelthari." "No, we're human, from Earth. We came a long way to find you." Another pause. Why? It was such a simple question. Why would strangers cross hostile space to rescue people they had never met? Why would anyone risk their lives for refugees from a species they didn't know? Malik wished she had a complex answer, something that would make sense in the galactic political framework. But the truth was simpler than that. "Because you asked for help," she said, "and we heard you." The rescue operation took 6 hours. Malik's crew worked with the precision of people who trained for disaster response, transferring Miraan from their dying ship to the Valiant's auxiliary bays. The Miraan were humanoid, their skin covered in bioluminescent patterns that shifted with their emotional state. Right now, those patterns showed fear, exhaustion, and something that might have been hope. They were thin, dehydrated, injured. Medical personnel moved among them, administering aid, scanning for critical conditions. The Miraan children clustered together, their bioluminescence dim with trauma. The adults tried to appear strong and mostly failed. One young Miraan, whose luminescent patterns indicated he was barely into adulthood, approached Malik with hesitant steps. His translator rendered his speech in flat standard English. "I am called Soleth. I must ask, you said you heard us. But the others, the 6 species who sit in council, they heard us too. They did not come. Why are you different?" Malik knelt down, bringing herself to eye level with Soleth. "Because sometimes the right thing to do is also the hard thing, and we decided the right thing mattered more. You risk war for us. Yes, we cannot repay this debt." "There's no debt," Malik said. "You don't owe us anything. We're just doing what anyone should do." Soleth's patterns shifted to colors the translator couldn't interpret, but his next words came through clearly. "The galaxy is not as I thought it was. We believed civilization meant protection. We learned it meant procedure. And now you show us it can mean compassion. This changes everything, I understand." 3 weeks into the operation, the human fleet had located and rescued 800,000 Miraan. The Vex Corridor was vast, and the refugee ships were scattered across dozens of light years, hiding in radiation zones and gravitational anomalies that made detection difficult. Admiral Kirby had split his forces into search groups, each combining military escort with hospital and transport capacity. It was working. Slowly, methodically, they were finding the survivors. And then intelligence detected the Zelthari battle group. 23 warships, moving in coordinated formation, sweeping through the corridor with clear intent. They were hunting. The Zelthari had sent their war leader Kranox, a commander known for brutal efficiency and absolute loyalty to the collective's ideological purity. Kirby studied the tactical display in his operations center, watching the red icons move through space that still contained over 2 million Miraan refugees. The geometry was bad. The Zelthari fleet was positioned to intercept human rescue operations, and their trajectory suggested they knew exactly where the largest concentrations of Miraan ships were located. Captain Cross leaned over the display. "We could hit them now. They're not expecting us. We could take out half their fleet before they knew what happened." "And then we're definitely at war," Kirby replied. "No ambiguity, no diplomatic wiggle room. We fired first." "Sir, they're heading directly toward the refugee concentration in Sector 7. 1,500 Miraan ships, over 1 million people. If the Zelthari reach them first," Kirby knew. The Zelthari weren't interested in capture or deportation. They wanted extinction, and they would achieve it efficiently. "How long until the Zelthari reach Sector 7? 48 hours at current speed." "How long until we can evacuate Sector 7? The operations officer ran the calculations. "With our current deployment, 72 hours minimum. We don't have enough transport capacity in position." Kirby felt the decision crystallize. He had known this moment was coming since he received the mission orders. Somewhere in his mind, he had already made this choice. Now he just had to commit to it. "All ships, new orders. Combat vessels form defensive perimeter around Sector 7. Hospital and transport ships continue evacuation operations at maximum speed. We're staying." Cross grinned. "Now we're talking." "We're not talking, Raymond. We're protecting civilians. There's a difference." "If you say so, sir." Kirby activated the fleet-wide channel. "This is Admiral Kirby to all ships. We have detected hostile forces moving toward the refugee concentration. We are not abandoning these people. We will establish a defensive position and continue rescue operations. We will only engage if fired upon, but make no mistake, we will defend ourselves and the civilians under our protection. I know this isn't what we trained for. I know this could get messy. But I also know that every person on this fleet volunteered to serve. Today, we're going to show the galaxy what that service means." Kirby out. The fleet moved into position. 47 human warships, ranging from nimble destroyers to the massive Ark Royal, arranged themselves in a defensive sphere around the Miraan refugee cluster. It was called Operation Shepherd. The humans were the dogs, the Miraan were the flock, and the Zelthari were the wolves. The wolves were about to discover that Earth's dogs had teeth. War leader Kranox reviewed the tactical display with satisfaction. The Miraan infestation was concentrated ahead, their primitive ships clustered in a region of space that limited their mobility. His battle group would sweep through the sector, eliminate the targets, and return to collective space within the week. It was simple, clean, and ideologically necessary. The human presence was irrelevant. Kranox had studied their military history. They were emotional, aggressive, prone to brave but ultimately futile gestures. They had no experience fighting an organized military force of the Zelthari's caliber. They would either retreat when faced with superior numbers, or they would learn a harsh lesson about interfering in collective business. Kranox had fought 43 engagements in his career. He had never lost. He did not intend to start now against a species that had barely left their home system when the Zelthari were building empires. His strategic officer reported the human fleet's disposition. Defensive posture protecting the Miraan ships, emotional as expected. Humans saw suffering and responded without calculating the cost. It made them predictable. They will move when we approach, Kranox said. They lack the courage to stand against us. And if they do not move, his second officer asked, then we remove them. 23 ships against 47 sounds unfavorable until you consider that we are Zelthari and they are human. Quality matters more than quantity. Battle group accelerated toward Sector 7. The human fleet waited. The engagement began not with violence but with communication. Admiral Kirby broadcast on all channels, his message direct and unambiguous. Zelthari vessels, this is Rear Admiral Thomas Kirby of the United Earth Space Force. You are approaching civilian refugees under human protection. We are conducting lawful rescue operations in neutral space. Alter your course or we will interpret your approach as hostile action. Kranox responded with the Zelthari equivalent of laughter. His transmission came through clear and contemptuous. Human commander, you are protecting genetic contaminants that the collective has deemed necessary to eradicate. Your interference violates the collective's sovereign right to manage inferior species. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences of your foolish compassion. Kirby's voice remained calm. The Miraan are under human protection. Any attack on them is an attack on the United Earth Space Force. Choose carefully. You cannot stop us, human. We are Zelthari. We do not fear your empty threats. Then I guess we're both about to learn something new today. The channel closed. The Zelthari fleet continued its approach. Kirby turned to his tactical officer. Authorization code Kirby Alpha 7. Rules of engagement are now active. We fire only in defense, but we fire to disable or destroy. No warning shots, no half measures. If they commit, we respond with everything we have. Understood? Understood, sir. Helm, execute tactical plan, Sierra. Let's see if they're paying attention. The human fleet shifted. It looked like a defensive repositioning, ships adjusting their formation to better protect the refugee cluster. But the movement was carefully calculated. The Vex Corridor's gravitational anomalies and radiation zones were dangerous to navigate. The human ships were positioning themselves to use those hazards as weapons. Kranox saw the movement and dismissed it as nervous maneuvering. He ordered his fleet into attack formation, preparing to punch through the human line and reach the Miraan ships beyond. The Zelthari advanced. The humans waited. At 30,000 kilometers, the Zelthari opened fire. The human destroyer screen took the first hits, their shields flaring with absorbed energy as Zelthari particle beams raked across their hulls. Damage was minimal, shields held, but the intent was clear. Return fire, Kirby ordered. The human fleet responded with coordinated precision. Railgun rounds accelerated to relativistic speeds, crossing the distance in seconds. Missile pods released their payloads, hundreds of warheads tracking toward Zelthari ships. Point defense lasers created a web of coherent light, intercepting incoming fire. The battle exploded across 1,000,000 cubic kilometers of space. The Zelthari expected a brawl ship against ship, firepower against firepower. They were a warrior species, bred for aggression, confident in their superiority. They advanced into the human formation, intending to shatter it through pure force. They advanced into a trap. Kirby had positioned his ships to funnel the Zelthari into a region of space where the corridor's gravitational eddies limited maneuverability. As the Zelthari fleet concentrated its forces, the human destroyers struck from multiple angles, using their superior speed to conduct hit-and-run attacks. The battleships held the center, their heavier weapons providing sustained fire that forced the Zelthari to respond. And the Zelthari, focused on the human warships, didn't notice the gravitational anomaly they were approaching until their lead vessels were caught in its influence. 3 Zelthari cruisers tumbled out of formation, their navigation systems struggling with the intense tidal forces. Human destroyers pounced, their weapons tearing into the vulnerable ships. 2 cruisers exploded. The third managed to limp away, venting atmosphere and debris. Kranox realized his mistake. The humans weren't brave fools. They were competent tacticians who knew how to use terrain. He pulled his forces back, regrouping outside the anomaly's influence. His fleet had taken damage, lost ships, but he still had numerical superiority in tonnage. The humans had won the first exchange, but the battle was far from over. All vessels, concentrated assault on the human flagship, Kranox ordered. Kill their command ship and the rest will falter. The Zelthari fleet focused its fire on the Ark Royal, 20 warships directing their weapons at a single target. It was overwhelming force, the kind of assault that should have shattered the carrier's shields and crippled it within minutes. Should have. The Ark Royal's defensive systems were state-of-the-art, built by a species that understood their ships needed to survive in hostile environments light years from repair facilities. Its shields buckled under the assault but held. Its point defense network shot down 80% of incoming missiles. And while the Zelthari focused on the flagship, the rest of the human fleet maneuvered freely. Captain Cross brought the Indomitable in from an oblique angle, the battleship's main batteries firing in sequence. Each shot was a magnetically accelerated slug moving at 5% lightspeed, carrying enough kinetic energy to punch through shields and armor. The Indomitable's fire was disciplined, methodical, and devastating. A Zelthari battleship lost power, its engines going dark. Another vessel took critical damage to its command structure. The Zelthari formation wavered, but the assault on the Ark Royal was taking its toll. Kirby felt his ship shudder with each hit that made it through the defenses. Damage reports scrolled across his displays. Shield generators failing, hull breaches on decks 7 and 12, casualties in the port flight bay. Hospital ship Mercy is reporting proximity warnings, his operations officer called out. Zelthari destroyers are attempting to flank our position, heading for the civilian ships. Kirby made the decision instantly. Detach Destroyer Squadron 3, intercept those Zelthari vessels. They do not reach the refugees. Sir, that leaves the Ark Royal with reduced escort. The refugees are the mission. Go. 5 human destroyers broke formation, accelerating to intercept the Zelthari flanking force. It was a race against time and physics. Human ships pushing their engines past safety margins to reach the Zelthari before they reached the Miraan. The destroyers arrived with seconds to spare. The engagement was brutal and close range, ships passing within kilometers of each other, weapons firing at point-blank range where shields were meaningless and armor was everything. 2 human destroyers took critical damage. 3 Zelthari vessels exploded. The flanking attack failed, but the cost was paid in human lives. On the Indomitable, Captain Cross was fighting his own battle. His ship had positioned itself between the Ark Royal and the heaviest Zelthari fire, taking hits meant for the flagship. The battleship's armor was holding, but barely. Damage control teams worked frantically to repair failing systems. Bridge, this is engineering. We've got a plasma fire in the main power conduit. If it reaches the reactor, we're done. Cross made the hardest decision a captain could make. Evacuate engineering section, seal it off and vent the compartment to space. Sir, we have people still working in there. I know, do it. The compartment vented. The fire died. 17 engineers died with it. The Indomitable stayed in the fight. The battle raged for 3 hours. Ships maneuvered and fired, systems failed and were repaired, people died and were replaced at their stations. It was chaos rendered into brutal mathematics. every equation solved in blood and metal. And gradually, the mathematics turned against the Zelthari. They had expected an easy victory against emotional humans. They had encountered professional warriors who knew their craft. The human ships worked together with practiced coordination, covering each other's weaknesses, exploiting every Zelthari mistake. The human crews were well-trained, their equipment reliable, their tactics sound. War leader Kranox stared at his tactical display and confronted a reality he had never imagined. He was losing. 5 Zelthari ships destroyed, 8 more heavily damaged, and the humans were still protecting the refugees, still maintaining their defensive line. He had 2 choices: commit his remaining forces fully, accept massive casualties, and possibly still fail to break through, or withdraw, accept the humiliation, and preserve his fleet for future operations. Pride demanded the first option. Tactical reality demanded the second. 3 more human ships appeared on his sensors, reinforcements arriving from human space. The balance had shifted completely. Kranox gave the order he never thought he would speak. All vessels withdraw, we return to collective space. The Zelthari fleet disengaged, transitioning to faster-than-light travel, leaving the battlefield behind. The humans had won. The cost was tallied in the hours that followed. 3 human ships destroyed outright: the destroyer Swift Arrow, the frigate Dauntless, and the corvette Raptor. 11 ships with heavy damage, including the Indomitable. 487 casualties, 143 dead. Admiral Kirby stood in the Ark Royal's Memorial Chapel, looking at the names being added to the ship's honor wall. Young people who had volunteered to serve, who had trained for years, who had traveled across light years to rescue strangers. Now they were names on a wall. He thought about the Miraan, 2.9 million of them now safe because of what these people had done. He thought about the alternative, the universe where humanity had said no like everyone else. The mathematics of the decision were clear: 487 human casualties to save 2.9 million Miraan lives. By any rational calculation, it was worth it. But Kirby also knew that each of those 487 had been a person, with families and dreams and potential futures that were now gone. The mathematics of war never captured that cost. Captain Cross found him there, his arm in a medical brace from injuries sustained during the battle. "We did good today," Cross said quietly. "We did what was necessary," Kirby replied. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Kirby thought about that. "Ask me again in 20 years. The human fleet escorted the Miraan refugees back to human space. It took 3 weeks of careful navigation, managing a convoy of thousands of ships moving at the speed of the slowest vessel. The journey gave the Miraan time to process what had happened, to understand that they were actually safe, that the nightmare was over. Soleth spent much of the journey talking with Commander Malik. The young Miraan was trying to understand what humans were, why they had done what they did. The Miraan had telepathic abilities, could sense emotions in others, and what they sensed from humans was genuinely confusing. "You feel guilt," Soleth said during one conversation. "Your species saved mine and you feel guilty." "We feel guilty because we couldn't save everyone," Malik explained. "Because people died, because we didn't act sooner. You were the only species that acted at all. Which makes us wonder why we were the only ones. What's wrong with the galaxy that compassion is considered reckless?" Soleth's bioluminescent patterns shifted through colors that indicated deep thought. "On my world, before the Zelthari came, we had a concept called Lumesh. It means the light that guides through darkness, not the destination but the act of carrying light for others. We thought the galactic species would be our Lumesh. We were wrong. You are what we imagined they would be." Malik looked out at the convoy, thousands of ships carrying millions of lives. "We're not special, Soleth. We're just people trying to do right. That is what makes you special. You believe doing right is ordinary." The convoy arrived in human space to a sight none of the Miraan would ever forget. Ships from across the solar system had gathered, civilian vessels alongside military craft, forming a corridor of welcome that stretched from the outer system to Earth itself. Humanity had mobilized. Mars had converted industrial domes into temporary housing. Europa had opened habitats beneath its ice. Luna, Titan, Ganymede, even the Belt colonies had pledged support. The response had been overwhelming. Billions of humans volunteering to help, donating resources, offering homes. There had been debate, certainly, concerns about the cost and the logistics, but the public sentiment had been clear. These were refugees who had nowhere else to go, and humanity had room. President Rostova addressed the Miraan from Earth, her message transmitted to every ship in the convoy. You have suffered losses we cannot imagine. You have been betrayed by those who should have helped. You have every reason to lose faith in civilization itself. But I want you to know that here in human space, you are not refugees. You are guests, and if you choose to stay, you will be neighbors. We don't have much experience with this, meeting other species, sharing our space. We're going to make mistakes. But we're going to try, because that's what people do when they have the chance to help. They try. The Miraan settlement process took months. They spread across human space, clusters of families choosing worlds that felt right to them. Many went to Mars, where the dome cities reminded them of their own architectural traditions. Others chose Europa, where the water felt like home. Some even settled on Earth itself, in specially built communities that accommodated their biological needs. The integration was not without challenges. Cultural differences, biological incompatibilities, the simple friction of two species learning to coexist. But both humans and Miraan approached the difficulties with patience. The Miraan taught humans about their telepathic arts, their understanding of emotional resonance. Humans taught the Miraan about resilience, about rebuilding after loss. And slowly, something new began to emerge. Not human culture or Miraan culture, but something blended. Communities where both species lived together, learned together, built together. Soleth became a teacher, helping young Miraan understand their new home. He taught classes on Earth history, trying to explain to children who had lost everything why this strange species from a distant world had risked so much to save them. One student asked the question that was on everyone's mind. Teacher Soleth, do humans expect payment? When will we have to repay the debt? Soleth thought about his conversations with Commander Malik about everything he had observed. There is no debt. That is the answer that makes no sense to us, but it is the truth. Humans help because help was needed. They expect nothing in return. But why? Because, Soleth said slowly, they believe this is what intelligent beings should do, not what they must do or what benefits them. What they should do. It is built into how they see the universe. The Galactic Council reconvened 6 months after the Battle of Vex Corridor. Ambassador Reeves attended, but this time he was not alone. 3 Miraan representatives accompanied the human delegation, their bioluminescent patterns marking them as survivors, witnesses to what had happened. The council chamber was tense. The Zelthari had demanded sanctions against humanity for interference. They had mobilized diplomatic pressure, calling in favors, threatening trade consequences. The vote failed. The Virin, reading the political currents, abstained. The Kelthros, shamed by human action, voted against sanctions. Even the Dorvani, bound by their love of law, could not find sufficient legal justification. Only the Thule supported the Zelthari, and they did so quietly without the certainty they usually projected. The motion failed 4-3. Reeves stood to address the council. He had prepared a diplomatic speech, full of careful language and measured tones. He discarded it. 6 months ago, I sat in this chamber and watched each of you explain why you couldn't help the Miraan. The economics weren't right. The philosophy didn't support it. The treaties didn't require it. You had very good reasons. Reasons that probably made sense in your governmental reports and policy analyses. He gestured to the Miraan representatives. These people were dying while you had your reasons. 3 million sentient beings were suffocating in the dark, and you wrote strongly worded statements. Cesic's scales flashed irritation. Ambassador Reeves, the council's decision-making process is complex and considers multiple. I know, Reeves interrupted. I understand. You have to weigh competing interests, balance risks, consider long-term consequences. I get it. But here's what I learned in the last 6 months. All of that complexity, all of that careful consideration, it's just an elaborate way of saying no, of justifying inaction, of making yourselves feel better about doing nothing while people die. He looked at each delegation. Humanity voted to help. We deployed our fleet. We fought a battle, we lost 143 people, and we saved 2.9 million Miraan. Was it risky? Yes. Could it have started a war? Yes. Did it cost us in resources and political capital? Absolutely. His voice hardened. But we can look at ourselves and know we did something. We acted. We helped. When it mattered, when lives were on the line, we chose compassion over comfort. Can any of you say the same? The chamber was silent. You asked us to follow your rules, your precedents, your traditions of careful inaction. We tried. We sat in this council and played by your procedures. But when the choice came down to your laws or our conscience, we chose conscience. And I'm not sorry. I'm not apologetic. Because in 100 years, in 1,000 years, humans will look back at this moment and be proud of what we did. Will your species be able to say the same? Reeves sat down. The Miraan representative, an elder named Veelash whose luminescence carried the weight of survival, stood to speak. I was on one of the ships, Veelash said, his translator rendering his words in flat standard English that couldn't convey the emotion in his patterns. I watched my world burn. I held my daughter as she died from injuries I could not treat. I called out to the stars, to anyone who might hear, and I received silence. 6 species heard us. 6 species had the power to help. Only one answered. He turned to face the human delegation. My people have a new word now, Reevash. It means the one who comes when called. It is a title of honor, a name we give to those who prove that civilization is more than just survival. It is compassion. It is courage. It is choosing to act when inaction would be easier. Veelash looked back at the council. I do not hate you for your silence. I understand fear, understand caution. But I will never forget who came and who did not. And my children and their children will remember. The galaxy will remember. The speech ended. The session adjourned. The representatives departed to their ships and their homeworlds, carrying with them the uncomfortable knowledge that they had been judged and found wanting. In the weeks that followed, something shifted in the galaxy. It was subtle at first, easy to miss among the normal diplomatic noise. But it was there. The Gren quietly expanded their military, building ships designed for more than just defense. They did not announce this publicly, but the shipyard construction was visible to anyone paying attention. The Kelthros established a new philosophical movement called the Active Compassion School. It challenged the traditional Kelthros doctrine of non-interference, arguing that observation without action was a form of participation in suffering. Even the Viren began reconsidering their relationship with the Zelthari. The profit margins were good, certainly, but they noticed that other species were looking at them differently now. Looking at them the way one might look at someone who had chosen money over morals. 3 smaller species that had been suffering under oppressive neighbors suddenly found their courage. They did not ask humanity for military intervention. They asked for something more profound. They asked how to find the strength to stand up for themselves. Humanity provided advisors, not soldiers, teachers, not commanders. The message was clear. We will help you, but we will not fight your battles for you. We will show you that it is possible to say no to oppression, but you must be the ones to say it. Within 2 years, the Zelthari collective found itself increasingly isolated. Trade agreements collapsed. Diplomatic relationships cooled. Their military expansion slowed as they faced resistance from species who had learned from humanity's example that intervention was possible. The collective did not collapse, but it could no longer expand unchecked. It had learned that actions had consequences, and that the galaxy was watching. 5 years after the rescue, a memorial was dedicated on Mars. It stood in the Valles Marineris, the great canyon that humans had slowly been transforming into habitable space. The memorial was designed by Miraan artists, a towering structure of crystal and light that caught the Martian sun and cast rainbow patterns across the red sand. 143 names were inscribed in the crystal, the humans who had died in the Battle of Vex Corridor. The memorial did not glorify war. It honored sacrifice. It remembered that freedom and compassion sometimes required people to risk everything. The dedication ceremony drew thousands. Miraan and humans together, military personnel and civilians, government officials and ordinary people who had volunteered to help refugees they had never met. Admiral Kirby, now retired, spoke briefly. He was older, his hair completely white, his face marked by years of command and the weight of decisions that had cost lives. "I think about them often," he said, looking at the names. "The people we lost. I think about who they might have become, what they might have accomplished. The loss is real and permanent, and no amount of justification changes that." He paused, collecting his thoughts. "But I also think about the alternative, the universe where we said no, where we stayed home and let the Miraan die because it was safer, because it was easier, because it was someone else's problem. And I know that universe would have been worse. Not because we would have lost people in battle, but because we would have lost something more important. We would have lost the belief that we could be better than our fears." A young cadet approached after the ceremony. His name was Alex Torres, fresh from the academy, assigned to his first ship next month. He had that combination of confidence and uncertainty that came with youth. "Admiral Kirby, sir, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Was it worth it? The risk, the casualties, the political fallout that almost started a war. Was saving the Miraan worth all of that?" Kirby looked past Torres at the memorial, at the Miraan children playing nearby with human children, their bioluminescent patterns bright with happiness. He looked at the mixed communities spread across Mars, at the blended culture that was emerging. He thought about Soleth, now a respected educator, about Valesh, who had joined the human diplomatic corps, about the 3 million lives that continued because humanity had chosen to act. "When I was your age," Kirby said, "I wondered what kind of species we would become out here in the galaxy. Would we lose ourselves trying to fit in with civilizations older and supposedly wiser? Would we become just another empire focused on profit and power and careful inaction?" That day in the Vex Corridor, we answered that question. He met Tor's eyes. "We're the species that shows up. We're the ones who answer the call. When someone needs help, when lives are on the line, when everyone else is explaining why they can't or shouldn't or won't, we're the ones who say yes." Is that risky? Absolutely. Does it cost us? Every time. But it also defines us. It tells the galaxy and ourselves who we are when it matters. Kirby looked back at the memorial. Those 143 people died protecting strangers. They didn't die for territory or resources or political advantage. They died because 3 million people needed help, and we were the only ones who cared enough to try. "Yeah, kid, it was worth it. It will always be worth it." Torres nodded slowly, processing this. "What if we had failed? What if we had lost the battle and the Miraan had died anyway? Then we would have failed trying, which is still better than succeeding at doing nothing." The sun set over Mars, the crystal memorial catching the last light and throwing it across the canyon in bands of color. Humans and Miraan together watched the day end and the stars emerge, those distant points of light that held so many worlds, so many species, so many opportunities to choose between comfort and courage. Earth hung in the sky, a blue-green jewel visible in the Martian evening. Humanity's homeworld, where billions of people went about their lives, most never knowing the names of those who had died in the Vex Corridor. But they lived in a universe where humanity had chosen compassion, and that choice rippled through everything. On Nexus Station, the Galactic Council continued its work. The Dorvani still cited treaties. The Viren still calculated profit margins. The Thule still observed with ancient certainty. But now, when difficult questions arose, when someone suggested that intervention was too risky or too complicated, there was a new counterpoint. What would the humans do? It was not always the deciding factor. Often it was not. The galaxy was vast and complex, and no single species could change everything. But it was there, that question, that example. The knowledge that compassion was possible, that action was achievable, that the right thing could be done even when it was hard. Humanity had not fixed the galaxy. They had simply shown that fixing it was possible, and sometimes that was enough. Soleth stood at the memorial as the crowd dispersed, his hand resting on the crystal that held the names of the dead. His bioluminescent pattern cycled through colors of remembrance and gratitude. A human woman approached, middle-aged, her eyes red from crying. She stopped beside Soleth, looking at one name in particular, Lieutenant James Morrison, her son. "I'm sorry," Soleth said quietly. "He saved my people." The woman nodded, unable to speak for a moment. When she did, her voice was thick with grief. "He always wanted to help people, Even as a child, he couldn't stand to see anyone hurting. I used to think it would get him into trouble. It got him into history, Soleth replied. Every Miraan child learns these names. They learn what your son did. They learn that when we had nothing, when we were dying in the dark, humans like your son came. We will remember forever. Will that be enough? She asked. Will remembering bring him back? No, Soleth said honestly, but it means he mattered. It means his choice changed the universe. For 3 million of my people, your son is the reason we are alive. Our children, our children's children, all of existence that flows from our survival exists because he chose to help. The woman touched the name carved in crystal. I wish I could tell him I'm proud. He knew, Soleth said with certainty. His telepathic sense had touched many humans over the years, had felt their emotions, understood their motivations. Humans who make that choice, they know. They know the cost and they choose to pay it anyway. Your son knew you would be proud. It is why he could be brave. They stood together in silence as the Martian night deepened and the stars grew brighter. Human and Miraan, mourning and celebrating, carrying forward the legacy of those who had chosen compassion when comfort would have been easier. In the void between stars, in the places where refugees still fled from oppression, the distress calls continued. The galaxy was vast and cruel, and suffering was never in short supply. But now, when those calls went out into the darkness, there was a new possibility. The chance that someone would hear, the hope that someone would come, and increasingly that someone wore the insignia of United Earth. They were not saviors. They were not perfect. They made mistakes, failed sometimes, arrived too late more often than they wanted to admit. But they came. And in a galaxy that had grown comfortable with inaction, that had perfected the art of justifying indifference, humanity had become something the stars had not seen in a very long time. They had become hope, not the abstract kind, not the philosophical concept debated in council chambers. Real hope. The kind that arrived in ships with weapons and medical supplies, with engineers and soldiers and diplomats who all shared a simple belief. That when someone calls for help, you answer. That when someone is suffering, you act. That the right thing to do is worth doing, even when it is hard, even when it is dangerous, even when everyone else says it is impossible. Humanity had joined the stars carrying this belief like a torch into the darkness. And the galaxy, slowly, reluctantly, was beginning to see by that light. The story did not end with the Miraan rescue. It continued in 1,000 small actions, in decisions made by species who had watched what humans did and wondered if they too could find that courage. It continued in the Gren fleet that finally stood up to raiders, in the Kelthros who chose action over observation, in the Viren who realized that some things mattered more than profit. It continued in every human who looked at suffering and refused to accept it as inevitable. The galaxy was old, vast, and complicated. Changing it was not a single heroic moment. It was the accumulation of choices, the steady pressure of people who believed the universe could be better and were willing to work for it. Humanity had only just begun, but they had begun. And that, in the end, was what mattered most.